Mr. Chair and members, and this is a pretty simple bill for me to Minnesota. Broadband should no longer be a luxury. It's a necessity, and I think we've seen that in the last year. Distance learning, telehealth, and all the things we've had to deal with. What the bill does, Mr. Chair and members, is appropriates $60 million a year in FY22 and $60 million a year in FY23 to the Office of Broadband for the Broadband Grant Program. With that, Mr. Chair and members, there is a list of testifiers that will speak to the merits of the bill.
The first I have is Vince Robinson, Minnesota Rural Broadband Coalition. Mr. Robinson, welcome to the committee, and please identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Vince Robinson, and I chair the Minnesota Rural Broadband Coalition. Thank you, Chair Pawlowski, for making broadband funding a committee priority this year. Appreciate that, as in the past. And thank you, Representative Eck, for and continued leadership on this issue. I'll make my comments very short. You've heard from me before on this topic. Coalition continues to support the $120 million in ongoing funding for the border-to-border grant program. This is per the recommendation of the Governor's Broadband Task Force. We know that there's a state budget surplus, and in addition to the state and local assistance that will be coming from the American Rescue Plan, we feel that this is a great opportunity to make a significant investment in broadband for our state. And obviously, we've talked about this before, the spotlight that the pandemic has put on broadband. Had we been making stronger investments in the past, many of our communities could have avoided some of the devastating circumstances that they faced without broadband available to them. I just implore you to not let that happen again in the future and push for this funding and get these communities hooked up. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm open to any questions.
All right, I'm going to go through the testifiers and then we'll have questions. Next on my list is Terrell Clark, County Commissioner, Stearns County. County Commissioner Clark, welcome to the committee and welcome back to the legislature. Please identify yourself for the record.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. I am Stearns County Commissioner and current Board Chair Terrell Clark. It is great to be here this morning. I want to thank you, Chair Pawlowski, for the opportunity to testify briefly today and for your commitment, as has already been stated, to making broadband a committee priority. I want to just give a few examples about how important this is to Minnesotans in all walks of life all across the state. My comments today are on behalf of the Minnesota Inter-County Association, the Association of Minnesota Counties, and clearly reflect the priorities of Stearns County's board. Thank you to Chair Eklund for authoring House File 14 and for championing increased funding for the state border-to-border broadband grant program. I personally, and I think people across state agree that broadband is now a necessity. It is not a luxury. Even after significant past investment and state grant funds, there remains 5,362 underserved parcels and 4,443 unserved parcels in Stearns County alone. We frequently hear stories about home businesses that have to shut down when school kids come home so they can dedicate the broadband access to the children for homework. Parents appreciate the schools providing their children with laptops, but complain they cannot be used due to lack of access. Or they need to sit outside libraries or other places with Wi-Fi, not exactly the optimal location for doing homework. Farmers who are unable to use the high-tech equipment that could be available to them if there was decent broadband. Small businesses who need high-speed internet to meet customer demand and to manage their businesses, and that was before COVID hit us. House File 14 would fully fund the Governor's Broadband Task Force recommendations by appropriating $60 million in each of the next 2 years. We strongly agree that that level of funding is clearly needed. In Stearns alone, we estimate the cost of connecting roughly 3,500 homes in the Belgrade-Bruton-El Rosa area to be about $24 million. The need crosses infrastructure it is. infrastructure that's needed by Minnesota businesses, by students in primary, secondary, higher ed, and lifelong learners, by seniors and families to help them stay connected, by medical and mental health professions, community leaders, dare I say the courts, and on and on. That the importance of high-speed internet access for all Minnesotans simply cannot be overstated and was clearly highlighted by the COVID pandemic. Thank you again, Chair Ecklet, for authoring House File 14 and the opportunity, Chair Pulaski and members. With me today is Matt Mossman, Executive Director of the Minnesota Inter-County Association, and we'll both be available for any questions you might have.
Thank you. Anna Boroff is next, Minnesota Cable Association. Welcome to the committee, and please identify yourself for the record.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Anna Boroff, and I am the Executive Director of the Minnesota Cable Communications Association. So good morning. Minnesota Cable would like to thank Representative Eklund for his thoughtful understanding of how broadband funding and policy impacts the entire state. We appreciate the committee's work towards our shared goal of ensuring that all Minnesotans have access to high-quality broadband. For years, Minnesota Cable's members have leveraged the state border-to-border grant program to reach unserved areas of Minnesota. The Office of Broadband Development's broadband coverage maps show that the state grant program has helped reduce the percentage of unserved areas. So this program has effectively targeted funding towards the most difficult and expensive areas to serve. And these grants have also helped leverage the billions in private capital investments by providers like my members to expand their networks across Minnesota. Minnesota Cable has not advocated for a specific amount of funding for the broadband grant program in the past, recognizing the many priorities that legislators balance. However, given the influx of federal funds and the shrinking number of unserved areas, we believe it's time for a robust discussion about how much more state money is necessary to bridge the final gaps in broadband access. So for some perspective, Minnesota has 157,000 unserved households left to reach the state's 2022 speed goal and 256,000 households left towards the 2026 goal of 100 over 20 service. So this year's state grant round, as just announced a few weeks ago by the Office of Broadband, that will cover about 7,000 more of those locations. Additionally, DEED just announced the Small Cities HUD CARES Act funding for broadband, so that will dedicate another $25 million to broadband expansion, which I believe will be allocated this year. And as you know, the federal government announced $408 million in Rural Digital Opportunity Funds will be awarded in our state. Minnesota Cable members are among the recipients of those RDOF funds that will cover 142,841 of the unserved locations in Minnesota at speeds that will meet or exceed the 2026 speed goals. And those RDOF build-outs will take place over the next 6 years. The American Rescue Plan, passed by Congress and signed by the President, will allocate state and local recovery funds, of which broadband infrastructure is an eligible use. So Minnesota will receive almost $4.8 billion from the American Rescue Plan. Unlike the CARES Act funding that you might have heard was able to be used for broadband as well last year, it was used by Minnesota counties and other local governments to invest in broadband builds. These funds, it sounds like, have a longer timeline in which they might be expended. These are not the only federal funds coming into Minnesota, so Alternative Connect American Cost Model Funds, or ACAM, accounts for another $65 million a year through at least 2026. And there are still some Connect American or CAF2 funds available. So when you add those federal funds to the already significant private sector investments taking place, this means the availability of contractors and supplies are going to be in high demand. So Minnesota Cable believes that the level of state funding for the border-to-border program in the next biennium should take into consideration all of the federal funding and ensure that the state broadband grants are not used to deploy broadband in areas that are already served. If those state funds are spent in areas that are already funded by federal sources, this would put the Office of Broadband inappropriately in the position of favoring a competitor in a market with a broadband subsidy, and that's never been the goal of the state's broadband grant program. So lastly, the unserved household numbers that I referenced earlier only count wireline connections. They don't count wireless broadband connections. And so as we watch technology change and improve access across the state, we think a conversation about what type of broadband service counts towards the state broadband goals is overdue. So, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for your opportunity to share our thoughts about these important topics. Thank you for your support for broadband across the state, and I am happy to answer questions either now or at the end. Thank you.
Ms. Boroff, thank you. We're going to hold off on questions, but I'll make one observation. First of all, thank you for bringing up the federal money. I had requested this in conversations I'd had with you over the last couple of weeks, and I'm going to continue to make those requests. I am looking forward to having a hearing on the federal, both the past and then the current federal allotments for broadband or cable or however they're describing it and however they're going to dole it out over the next 6 years. But frankly, we just don't have enough information yet to have a hearing. When we get the information, we will have a detailed hearing because I do share a concern about what we're going to do with the state allotment and then what the federal government's going to do. And we certainly don't need to overlap. We could target our dollars much better if we knew exactly what the federal government is going to do. So members, we anticipate another hearing on this as soon as we get all the information. Next on my list, Monty Moreau. Welcome to the committee, and please identify yourself for the record.
Good morning, Chair Pulowski, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Monty Morrow. I'm with Nuvera. We are a rural telecommunications, broadband, and cable TV provider located in central and southern Minnesota. We serve 28 communities, including Hutchinson, Prior Lake, and our headquarters in New Ulm. I also currently serve as the chair of the Minnesota Telecom Alliance's Legislative Committee, and I'm here today testifying on behalf of both my company and behalf of the other member companies of MTA. The MTA membership is a mix of family-owned companies, cooperatives, privately held, and publicly traded companies. While MTA members may have different corporate structures, one thing we have in common is our commitment to serve broadband in rural Minnesota. I appreciate the opportunity to tell you about our personal involvement in the border-to-border grant program. Nuvera has participated in all rounds of grant applications from 2015 to 2019. We have applied for and been awarded approximately $2.4 million to build to 758 subscribers. Nuvera has matched approximately $3.4 million for total cost projects of over $5.8 million. This summer, we will be building to another 740 customers at a cost of approximately $5.4 million. The grants we receive are instrumental in my company's decision to build to these rural customers. Also, the 2-year funding greatly assists us in developing the construction projects. Many of our projects are continuation of previous builds, and this is vital to how we engineer. Without the grants, it would definitely have taken us a lot longer to build out to these customers. The customer counts I just mentioned are a bit conservative. Nuvera has always built projects capable of serving more rural customers than targeted in our project applications. We're very proud of that. Also, the grant projects are not in lieu of our capital spending plans, but in addition to. Mr. Chair, members, this program works. It leverages local investments made in business plans that, quite frankly, otherwise wouldn't. I'm fortunate also enough to participate in a national telecom alliance as well. The Minnesota model, as it's referred to, is the envy of the rest of the states. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention that OBD does an incredible job. We've done a lot over the past year of the program, but I'll tell you, we've got a lot more to do. We greatly appreciate your support in getting this vital service to more customers every day. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to questions at the end.
Next on my list, Daniel Larson, Minnesota Rural Counties. Welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself for the record.
Mr. Chair and members, happy to be with you this morning. Dan Larson, Executive Director, Minnesota Rural Counties, 35 counties outside the Twin Cities metro area, and the only organization to advocate specifically for rural county concerns. Pleasure to be with you today to talk about this very important issue. So MRC is a member in good standing with the Minnesota Rural Broadband Coalition, and why shouldn't we be? If there ever was an issue that's in the wheelhouse of rural counties, this is it. Education, culture, medicine, business, government, like the very meeting that we're participating in today, all dependent on an affordable and adequate internet connection. And today, members, 20% of the state, an estimated 20%, is still Minnesotans unserved and underserved, and really on the dark side of the broadband universe. So, and during COVID, I might add, that connection is a veritable lifeline
the outside world. So MRC supports the bill, appreciate Representative Eklund's commitment and the commitment of the dozen or so members who have signed on to the bill, which represents something that's hard to come by these days, broad bipartisan support.
Members, any questions?
Oh, Mr. Chair?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Did I cut you
Did I
off?
stop too long? Yeah, no, after I make a strong point like that, I have to collect myself. And so I just got a couple of things left.
I fully understand. I apologize.
Okay.
If you want to repeat it again, that's okay too.
Did I start from the top or can I just keep going?
I would just repeat your strong point if that might be enough.
Okay, so we've been on this funding at MRC since inception, and I'll never fail. Here's another strong point, and I think you might like this. We never fail to recognize the leadership that you, as legislators, have provided as a body. What you've funded the vision that's been established by the State Broadband Task Force, and that vision has had significant input from user groups like the coalition. So the commitment to this broadband funding, to the grants program, has elevated Minnesota to leadership status around the nation and a model for other states to follow. But it's no secret that there's more to do. So in sports parlance, we are in the red zone, and we're at that point where the last 15 or 20 yards are the hardest to get across the goal line. But the best feature in this bill that will help accomplish that is the part about funding the base. So we've been concerned about the greater portion of the state already funded. The hardest part, the low-hanging fruit, if you will, is gone, and the hardest part is yet to be done. So we're committed to working with you as a committee and your leadership to advocate for full funding for this bill and and that the funding should go to needs-based. So the need is defined and the funding is defensible. So our message to the legislature is think big, be bold, and thank you again for all the work you've done.
Representative Sanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to thank you and thank Representative Eklund for this bill. Representative Eklund, I know that you have really championed this issue for the last couple of terms for bienniums, and thank you for not letting up on this issue. The district that I represent is really primarily the economic driver is one type of industry, and it's a boom-bust type of industry. Without investments in broadband, we are struggling to diversify, and we desperately need that. And it goes beyond just diversifying an economy. It's healthcare, it's also our education. So this is a very important bill, and I appreciate your hard work, not just this year, but in the years leading up to this. Thank you for bringing it forward.
Any other questions from other members? I don't see any. What's nice today is we get to see Representative Eklund. If you remember last year, particularly when we were starting doing everything remotely, we could only hear him because he was in his home and the only connection he had was audio. So he's in his office today, and I think there have been some improvements since last year with Representative Eklund remotely, but that we've seen the crisis visually in our committees and in our work at the legislature. So Representative Eklund, last word is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And you stole my line, but the committee and members, if you remember when I presented this bill in January, I think, or maybe early February, I was in a rented office because I wasn't sure that my connection at my house would work. When people talk, Ms. Boroff talked about the upcoming speeds. I don't know what 25 up and 3 down or 100 up and 20 down means. I just know that it doesn't work in my house and it doesn't work in a lot of other people's houses. So I ask for your support on this bill, and thank you, Mr. Chair, members.
All right, with that, seeing no further questions, I'll renew my motion that House File 14 be recommended to pass and be referred to the Ways and Means Committee. The clerk will take the roll.
Pulowski.
Pulowski, aye.
Pulowski, aye. Sandell.
Aye.
Sandell, I. Keel,
Keel, aye.
Keel, I. Spearman,
Aye.
Spearman, I. Bliss,
Aye.
Bliss, I. Burkle,
Aye.
Burkle, I. Edelson,
Aye.
Edelson, I. Frazier,
Aye.
Frazier, I. Hamilton,
Aye.
Hamilton, I. Liz Legard,
Aye.
Liz Legard, I. McDonald,
McDonald, aye.
McDonald, I. Sandsted,
Aye.
Sandsted, I. Sundin,
Aye.
Sundin, I. 13 ayes, 0 nays.
The motion prevails and House File 14 is on its way to Ways and Means. Mr. Larson is still with us. I like the idea of the pause. I've used something different in my teaching. I've repeated strong points 3 times slowly. So either way works well, but the pause did catch me off guard. So thank you all. Any other business before the committee? Seeing none,